And we are finally on air again. And it is great to be back for our weekly discussion about A Course in Miracles. How are you this morning, Barrett?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for asking.
That's
And I'm
great.
definitely excited to take this another level deeper too. That's one of the things I found about the course is that as you keep practicing and working with it, is you keep finding deeper and deeper layers, even if it's the same words that are presenting themselves. There's another piece. So
Yeah, that's the brilliance of the way the Course was presented to us was that it's a lifelong journey once you get involved. I mean, ultimately the idea is to grow out of the Course just like we're supposed to grow out of all helping situations and recognize our full independence as expressions of God. But for a long-term journey, the course is something that always stays fresh.
hmm, yeah, yeah. So how are you doing today, Chris?
Good. I'm looking at things astrologically here. We a couple of days from now we have a new moon coming up in Sagittarius. When we step into it, is always much more uh, passionate about life. I think that we've been going through the Scorpio time, and Scorpio is very deep and looking for the deeper meaning of life in all directions. And now we'll be entering that phase of going on our own personal quests, entering into a holiday season. Joviality will become a theme once again. So that's a nice shift forward as we approach the holidays. And of course, we had in the last part of good old Scorpio here, the East Coast got bombarded with an incredible amount of snow. And I think that's an interesting phenomenon to look at. This is an unprecedented event, evidently the biggest snowfall in recorded history. Um, And taking a look at that in relationship to the Course in Miracles, what are your thoughts about these major events that happen in relationship to time and space and our position in the universe?
Well, I think it is kind of remarkable in the sense that, there's all these fluctuations. That's kind of what this world was made to be, was a world of ups and downs, a world of, highs and lows. So we've had all these record-breaking temperatures, both high and low. Now we've got record-breaking snows. Uh, we've had a lot of record-breaking droughts recently, too, in the country. So there's all these extremes, and I think, um, as people, we need to do our best to navigate them and to do whatever we need to do to kind of move through these situations. But I think it's very easy from the ego perspective to, make this like a really big deal, an impediment to our peace, a reason that we can't be happy. And as soon as we get into that mindset, then we know that we're letting go of our true power, which is the power of the mind, and we're replacing that power on some external circumstance. So I think, this world will always have extremes. It will always have ups and downs, and even when things seem kind of normal, sometimes there's a sense of boredom. Well, I wish things would be a little bit more exciting around here. So it's like, from the ego perspective, we just can't win. But when
Exactly.
we change it around, all of a sudden we can find that peace, and that's really what our goal is as we keep working with this material.
Exactly. It's interesting how the ego is so invested in putting on this amazing, um, almost theatrical, well, definitely theatrical event um, that surrounds us in all directions, and the whole point of it is to keep us engaged, to keep us like the little chipmunk in the cage going round and round and round and yet getting nowhere. So,
Yeah,
uh,
it's tiring on that wheel.
yes, that wheel does get difficult. Well, going back to the Course and looking at that whole process of time, in early on in the Course, in the first chapter, we have um, some dialogue about what a miracle is, and we discussed to a certain degree what miracles are last week. But then the consciousness known as Jesus goes on to talk about how time is the thing that keeps us trapped in this adventure here, in this realm. And it states in the Course, the miracle minimizes the need for time. In the longitudinal or horizontal plane, the recognition of the equality of the members of the sonship appears to involve almost endless time. However, the miracle entails a sudden shift from horizontal to vertical perception. This introduces an interval from which the giver and receiver both emerge further along in the time than they would otherwise have been. The miracle thus has a unique property of abolishing time to the extent that it renders the interval of time it spans unnecessary. There is no relationship between the time a miracle takes and the time it covers. And that's an interesting idea, because basically, to kind of paraphrase that, when the miracle, the event of a change of mind, shift from a perception of fear to love and reunification with those around us, re-examining of the dynamic, and then acceptance of them, even though they may appear to be flawed, or we appear to be flawed, it nonetheless has the effect of erasing the past, bringing things into harmony or union in the moment, and logically the next step would be to assume that the future is altered also. So time becomes a very interesting thing to examine when we are looking at A Course in Miracles. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, time is not what we think it is. As you were just stating, it seems like it's this linear thing that goes from past to present to future. And this passage definitely implies that it's not as fixed as it's chunks of it that we can kind of cut out from having to go through. And I think one of the reasons that it's like that is because time is really more like a hologram, in the sense that all of time is really happening in the present, and that this present is really happening in all of time. Or another way to say that is past, present, and future are all happening simultaneously. But in our mind, we separate them out. Since the ego is the thought of separation, the ego's version of time separates the past from the present from the future. And there's a passage in the Course that really speaks to this. This is in chapter 13, section 4, excuse me. It says, the ego, on the other hand, regards the function of time as one of extending itself in place of eternity. For like the Holy Spirit, the ego interprets the goal of time as its own. The continuity of past and future under its direction is the only purpose the ego perceives in time, and it closes over the present so that no gap in its own continuity can occur. Its continuity then would keep you in time, while the Holy Spirit would release you from it. So I think what this is saying is that the ego would keep us mindless by having us focus on the future or on the past, but never really being totally present to the holy instant. And that when we are really standing in that place of power, when we have relinquished our identity completely with the individual self and put it with the Holy Spirit as self, then we find ourselves in this place where it is sort of timeless. And that doesn't mean that we can't be experiencing the things that are happening here, but it does mean that we are not believing that this is the truth. So just as though we were having a lucid dream in bed at night, we would be able to be in the dream world, but experiencing the fact that it really is a dream. and not being as afraid of what's happening in the dream, not being so intensely swayed by the circumstances around us. And that is really the goal of the Course, is to have us have this realization so that as we go through our lives, we can be in this place of presence. We can be in this place of peace, whether things in our lives seem smooth or hard, whether the forecast has 1 inch of snow or 72 inches of snow, like I think they got in Buffalo. There's not a sense of being any meaningful difference, even though, of course, in this world it's very different. So I think that's the way that we can use the concept of time to return to the eternal present.
And that really is a theme that occurs in literally every spiritual discipline. I mean, the Buddhists are definitely very focused on that as a central goal in their practices. Mystical Christianity and Islam and Judaism, that's also a very important theme. And I know in the tribal traditions in Native America, the Aboriginal peoples, they also have that set on their sights set on that as a goal to achieve. But the interesting thing about the way that time works is it shifts our identity into a state of victimhood. As soon as you are relating to the past and embracing it and dragging it with you into the future, then you've got all these things that somebody did to you or that you did to somebody else, and all of this guilt and all of this anger and all this frustration. So when you're working with people who have that victim mentality, who are really addicted to playing the victim role, do you bring up the idea of time in order to get them to perhaps embrace a little bit of a different perspective on whether or not they actually are, in fact?
Well, sometimes. I think that in my work with people, one of the things that often comes up is past lives, since that's a big part of my modality. And what that does a lot of times is it does change the perspective of time, because when we are very focused on this victimhood that you're talking about, when we're feeling like someone else has done us wrong or some circumstance is keeping us down, it's very much about this self that I think I am. And I think one of the benefits of this idea that we've had many incarnations is that it changes our perspective, so that this life doesn't seem like the be-all, end-all as much. It just seems like one link on a very long chain that we're living. And then what happens is we can take the next step from that idea that, okay, this world and this life that I'm living are not as important, to the idea that this world that I'm experiencing and this life that I'm living actually have ultimately no importance in relation to the importance of love, the importance of God, the importance of my true self. Now that's not the next step, as I was just saying. That's the last step on the journey. So we don't need to get ahead of ourselves, and we don't need to feel bad if we're not there yet. Practically no one is. So we just need to be with whatever we're going through right now. I think that's one of the nice things about this course, is all we really need to work on forgiveness with is the issue that's presenting itself to us in this moment. Sometimes that means that we're looking at issues from the past because that's what's up in our memory. But it's no different to heal an issue from the past than it is to heal an issue in this moment that seems to be happening in our lives. It's actually the exact same dynamic. And by holding that kindness, holding that heart energy, we can come to see with these concepts of the Course that all of these problems are nothing more than a painting that we have sort of painted over the truth. And that when we can peel away that painting, what we find in front of it, and all the way through it, is that light that's always been there, but that we've been turning away from.
Exactly. And you know, you're kind of in the thick of things with past life work, and I know that in my own experiences, doing it from both perspectives, having people read my past lives or take me on that reverie recall journey through hypnosis or whatever to recall a past life, or facilitating that process for other people. As I have continued to grow and grow and grow more deeply into the course and more deeply into just the existence of um, this material realm, uh, especially as a thread with my Native American ancestry, I've come to realize that in the bigger picture, ultimately, every person who has ever lived, or who is living now, or whoever will live in the future, is actually a past, present, or future life that I am having.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that all of a sudden takes us to a much broader vision of, you know, all of this energy or all of these images and thoughts and dreams and desires and fears and frustrations that we're building on within our own personal expression has overtones of racial memory. It has overtones of, um, you know, geographical dynamics. I mean, if you were on an island and the volcano exploded and you perished, all of these different elements are woven into this greater thread of life, this bigger tapestry of life. So that once again gives us the opportunity to step out of the idea of personalizing. Oh, my last incarnation was, you know, I was a drug pusher in Panama in the 1940s, and you know, ended up getting caught in the revolution and yada yada yada. So that every past life that we examine can then become another tool for detachment, if that makes sense. Do you find that also?
Yeah, exactly. I think that there is a danger in past life work of, like you said, making it our identity. You know, we can find some past lives that we really are attracted to and attached to, and by holding those like really tightly as our outfit or as our costume, we're just reinforcing this separation idea. So I totally agree with what you're saying, that we can use these concepts as a release from the idea of a small s self, and step into the grandeur of our true self. But that needs to be the intention. And if we're just sort of going in a past life as a tourist, you know, trying to take some pictures and get some souvenirs, then it's true. It's just not as helpful. And ultimately, the goal is for us to release our karma, and that means less and less attachment as opposed to more and more attachment. And in the end, what we'll find is that we'll get to a place where there's no attachment to the self, and that the only thing that we're attachment's not really the right word, but the only thing that we're really one with is that sense of wholeness, because that's all that's left. We've relinquished our kind of striving and our clawing at this individual self. And then when we set that down, it's not like we need to then fill the space with what we are, because what we are is always there. It's more like when we stop shielding ourselves from our truth, then truth simply is.
Mm-hmm. Uh, and another interesting thing that I have on one or two occasions experienced was I would be working with people, and they in fact all of a sudden went off in the direction of a future life, and they were describing things that happened to them in one or multiple future lives, and that I found interesting in that it did show up in some of Gary Renard's work, and Gary, of course, gave us The Disappearance of the Universe and some other publications, and you have had uh, a significant amount of interaction with Gary. Just what do you think about the process of being able to accept the idea of a future life, number one, and number two, uh, what is there to be gained from projecting into the future as opposed to the past?
Well, I think that from one perspective, the Course says the script is written. So if we accept that, it means that all of the lifetimes have been laid out. And some of them we seem to have already walked down those paths, and some of them it seems like we have yet to do that. But when we kind of go into this idea that it all is happening right now, then yeah, we can step into the future, we can step into the past. I would say that um, it seems really different, I guess, but that's just from one level of consciousness. From another level, it's like, it's just a different flavor of ice cream. In the end, it's all going to melt, and hopefully we can enjoy the ice cream as we as we watch it melt away. Um, so I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I think that definitely gives people a sense of where to go with that whole idea of past, present, and future existence, and arriving at a comfort zone with just being in the here and now, being in the moment, where your actual power or your actual truth is not only existent but is forever protected. And that's the other thing that time gives us a sense of is here in the Midwest we have tornadoes that build up and come through, and we're always or not fascinated, but attached to the element of time within that. Oh, the tornado is 3 miles away or 20 miles away or whatever, and it's coming my direction. Is it going to go north or south or hit me directly? So there's a lot of fear and apprehension that ends up being invested in our day-to-day existence from our attachment to our obsession with time. So once again, how do you approach that idea of being able to disconnect from time, just as a general concept to work with?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has to happen in our everyday experiences. We have to be honest with ourselves. These ideas are very profound and they are very lofty, and ultimately, in my perspective, they do point us to that experience of truth. But we can't lie to ourselves about where we are. We can't really fool ourselves. So, in your example, if there's whether coming our way a tornado or a storm or anything, and it brings up in us a sense of anxiety, we need to acknowledge that anxiety. We need to acknowledge the fear that we're feeling around what's happening in our lives. And then in my mind, it always goes back to the practice of the miracle, as we're talking about, the practice of forgiveness. And that means that the first thing I do in that instance is I realize I'm not upset about something outside of me. I'm actually upset because of something within, and this circumstance in my life is just showing me what's within me. And then when I get to that point, then I know too that I don't really need to be as upset as it seems, because as we've discussed, when we accept this world is really just an illusion, that this world is not really real, then it means that there is no cause for fear. There is no cause for suffering. And because nothing has really happened, I don't need to be upset. And then I always like to end it with the idea of asking the Holy Spirit for help and choosing His strength. And as we do that over and over and over again, we just start seeing that we're never upset for the reason that we think, which is one of my favorite workbook lesson titles. It's just a great reminder because, yeah, the world's going to throw stuff at us, but we can keep unplugging from it, and we just need to stick with it. There are going to be times where it happens smoothly, and there are going to be times where it feels like we kind of are dragged kicking and screaming to letting go of the fear. But however it's feeling, it's always the same consistent process that we have to go through again and again.
Exactly, and that kind of loops back around into the idea of placement and being able to identify where you actually are. And once again, in the Course, over and over again, it reiterates the idea that we are, in fact, residing in God, and that we are in a very deep, deep sleep, and within that having a sometimes magnificent and other times hideous dream. But I think one of my favorite simple little statements that helps me get back to that place of being present in that resonance within divinity is that simple theme of I am not a body, I am free, I am as God created me. And that opens up the floodgate of images around the idea of all of our vulnerability as a body and all of our need and fear and frustration and clutching and groveling to protect the body suddenly becomes no longer relevant or necessary because we've realized the body is just like, a 1958 Chevrolet gets banged up and eventually goes through the auto crusher and becomes, silverware on table settings on airplanes going from Hong Kong to New York City. So it is all a fascinating process and a fascinating journey, and ultimately time is, I guess you could say, one of the most visceral illusions that we have to approach and look into and resolve for ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes time to undo time, or undo our experience of time. So it's one of those interesting paradoxes that we get with the Course.
Yeah, and that's something else with the Course. I have never, in 68 years of bumbling around on the planet, I was not aware of as much paradox as in the last 20 years of dealing or working diligently with the Course. Is that the Course all of a sudden makes you so aware of how everything that we are surrounded by is vested very heavily in paradox, and that's probably a good way to wind up our discussion here. It is an interesting paradox that the two of us are sitting on different sides of the Chicago area having one-on-one dialogue with the illusion of having to have the internet support that.
Maybe next week's we'll just do telepathically then.
That way anybody who wants to add that to their meditation for next Thursday evening, it'll be out there in universal consciousness.